After America ended its longest war in Afghanistan, international reactions are pouring in, expressing concerns over the crisis. Several world bodies are left worried as the future of millions of Afghans is left in lurch. NATO chief Stoltenberg said Kabul's airport must be kept open. He vowed to not forget Afghans left behind after America's exit. He also said that the NATO will analyze what went wrong here. Afghanistan was one of NATO's most important missions since the Cold War.
Held risks, not forget them, and we will continue to work for their right to live in a safe and orderly way. NATO allies and partners demonstrated the commitment to help people out by getting more than 120,000 people out. We'll have a process where we're going to assess, analyze and have a lessons learned process in NATO because we need to understand better both what went wrong, but also to analyze the achievements we made in Afghanistan, not least when it comes to fighting terrorism.
The Interior Minister of the EU held an emergency roundtable meeting on Afghanistan. The 27-member bloc met to find a consensus on ways to help Afghanistan. They also brainstormed on how to help the neighbouring countries of Afghanistan to deal with the refugee crisis that has now unfolded.
We are in a situation, of course, where we need a comprehensive approach towards Afghanistan. We need to avoid a humanitarian crisis. We need to avoid a migratory crisis. And we need to avoid security threats. And this is what we need to discuss today.
And we're now being joined by our correspondent Nick Harper for more on this. Nick, thank you for joining us. Now, despite plummeting approval ratings, US President Joe Biden has called the evacuation from Kabul an extraordinary success. What do you make of it?
That's right, yes. He defended his decision to withdraw and he backed it up by saying it was a success, saying that he had the unanimous support and recommendation of all his national security team and his military advisors. They thought he was doing the right thing and he's sticking by that. The American public doesn't feel it is a success, but they do feel that it was the right thing to do. A survey carried out in just the past week by the Pew Research Center shows that 54% of Americans, the majority, support the withdrawal from Afghanistan. The majority has supported withdrawing from Afghanistan for some years. However, the majority of respondents, 42%, said that the Biden administration had handled it poorly. And there is a real worry that if the situation deteriorates, as we heard there, the potential for that humanitarian catastrophe, that economic catastrophe, then the American public may begin to see those images of, once again, the Taliban repression of women and girls and wonder whether or not their president made the right decision. So yes, at the moment, the president is calling it a success. That's up for debate. He does have the public on his side, but he may not do. He's already seen a considerable backlash, even from within his own party. Other politicians very angry that Americans got left behind, about 200 of them. And potentially tens of thousands of Afghans who worked for the US government were also stranded with no ability to leave the country before the US troops pulled out.
Right, Nick. Now, Biden has said that 90% of the Americans have been airlifted so far. Now that the Kabul airport is controlled by the Taliban, do you think the group will cooperate on the evacuation front for the rest of the Americans?
Well, that's the huge unknown. I mean, there was always this situation whereby the US was saying they would get everybody out while they were still in the country. But now there's no US military presence, there's no US diplomatic presence, and really there's no leverage on the Taliban to ensure that they uphold those promises to let everyone leave. Not just Westerners, the couple of hundred Americans who are still there, but potentially thousands of Afghans who somehow want to get out of the country on flights if they can, but more likely over the borders. They hope, the Biden administration, the Taliban will uphold their end of the bargain. But the White House press secretary Jen Psaki earlier said that they had made no deal, no agreement with the Taliban. They just had an understanding. In other words, a hope that the Taliban would let people out. She did say that the US did have some leverage, and that was in the form of the global marketplace, that there was economic leverage, that the Taliban will need international support and international funds, potentially from the IMF, and therefore will probably uphold their end of the bargain. But that remains to be seen. It is very much a hope that the Taliban will let people continue to leave, but it's not something that the Biden administration definitely knows is going to happen.
All right. Now, President Joe Biden also says that the Afghanistan crisis has taught the United States many lessons about future foreign policies. What are some of the fundamental changes that we are looking at now?
Yeah, President Biden, when he made that speech earlier, said that he wanted any military involvement to effectively be short, sharp campaigns, not to be these prolonged, bogged-down wars that last several decades. He's made it clear for some time, and he backed it up in the speech, that he feels that the threat of terrorism and its location has changed, that it's no longer concentrated in just the Middle East, in Afghanistan, in Iraq. It has spread to the Sahel region of Africa, with Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda, to Somalia, seeing Al-Shabaab down there, to Al-Qaeda elements in the Arabian Peninsula, in Asia. A lot of terrorism in lots of different places that the US says it now needs to fight. And I think we will see that evolving US strategy when it comes to counter-terrorism. Much like we've seen their counter-terrorism in Libya and Yemen. There's no US presence there. There's no boots on the ground. That is likely to continue. They will try and engage the terrorists, but without putting US troops in harm's way on the ground in those countries. And I think there will be that evolving assessment, an evolving way that counterterrorism is now done under the Biden administration.
Right, Nick. Also, the United States invaded Afghanistan back in 2001 to put an end to Al-Qaeda. 20 years later, as it leaves, the country has a new target, that is the ISIS Khorasan. What do you think could be Biden's next step now?
Well, that's also another big fear of the United States. They say that the Taliban can never again allow their country to become a breeding ground for terrorists, as it did at the end of the 1990s with Al-Qaeda, effectively having safe haven under the Taliban to be able to come up with terrorist plots and plans. With ISIS-K in the country, there is this fear that they will be able to carry on with impunity, even though they're sworn enemies of the Taliban enemies of ISIS-K. The Biden administration needs some sort of assurance. They say actions, not just words, that the Taliban will ensure that ISIS-K doesn't get even more of a foothold in the country. But it's something which will be very, very difficult for the United States to be able to actively achieve, as they have no military there, they have no diplomats there. They're just, again, relying on the Taliban and this shared desire not to have ISIS-K in the country.
Right, Nick. Thank you so much for joining us with all your inputs on that. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.